Imagine being 20 years old and inheriting an army, a kingdom on the verge of bankruptcy, and enemies on every border plotting your destruction. Most people at 20 are figuring out their lives, maybe finishing college, deciding on a career. You're worried about student loans or your first real job. Now imagine that instead of any of that, you have to conquer the known world. Not because you want to, because if you don't, you'll be dead within a year. Your own people will kill you, your enemies will invade, and everything your father built will crumble into dust. That's not a hypothetical. That was reality for a young man named Alexander in 336 BC, and what he did next would change human history forever. This is the story of Alexander the Great, but not the legend you think you know, not the mythology, not the Hollywood version, not the superhero who couldn't lose. This is the story of a military genius who revolutionized warfare, who took everything anyone had ever known about battle and threw it out the window, who won not because he had better soldiers, though he did, not because he had more men, because he almost never did. He won because he thought differently. He saw things other commanders missed, and he was absolutely, terrifyingly willing to gamble everything on a single moment. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into the mind of history's most successful military commander. By the time we're done, you'll understand not just what Alexander did, but how he did it, why it worked, and what made him so different from every other general before or since. If you want to understand genius, real genius, the kind that changes the world, hit that subscribe button, because this is going to be one hell of a story. Let's start at the beginning. Alexander was born in 356 BC in Macedonia, the wild frontier kingdom north of Greece. His father was Philip II, a brilliant king who had transformed Macedonia into a military powerhouse. His mother was Olympias, a princess from a neighboring kingdom who was reportedly intense, mystical, and possibly involved in snake cults. Yes, really. Alexander's childhood was, let's say, complicated.
But here's what matters. From the time he could walk, Alexander was being groomed to rule. Philip hired the best tutors money could buy. The most famous was Aristotle. Yes, that Aristotle, one of history's greatest philosophers. For 3 years, Aristotle taught Alexander everything: philosophy, science, medicine, literature. Alexander loved Homer's Iliad so much, he apparently slept with a copy under his pillow his entire life. His favorite character was Achilles, the greatest warrior of the Trojan War. Remember that. It becomes important. But Aristotle taught him more than just books. He taught him how to think critically, how to analyze problems from multiple angles, how to question assumptions. This would become Alexander's secret weapon. While other generals followed the established rules of warfare, Alexander questioned everything. Is this the best way? What if we did it differently? What if everyone is wrong? At the same time, Philip was teaching Alexander about war, not from books, but in the field. At age 16, Alexander was left in charge of Macedonia while Philip was away campaigning. A neighboring tribe rebelled, thinking they could take advantage of the young regent. Alexander crushed them, founded a city on their territory, and named it after himself. At 16, Philip reportedly said that Macedonia wasn't big enough for both of them. He meant it as a compliment. 2 years later, at the Battle of Chaeronea, Alexander commanded the cavalry on the left wing of Philip's army. The enemy was Thebes and Athens, 2 of Greece's most powerful city-states, and they had the famed Sacred Band of Thebes, an elite unit that had never been defeated. Alexander led a charge that shattered them completely. At 18, he had proven he could lead men in battle.
But then everything changed. In 336 BC, at a wedding celebration, Philip was assassinated, stabbed by one of his own bodyguards in front of hundreds of witnesses. The motives are still debated. Some think it was personal revenge. Some think it was a political conspiracy. Some think Olympias, Alexander's mother, was behind it. We'll never know for certain. What we do know is this: Alexander was 20 years old, and suddenly he was king. And immediately the vultures circled. Greek city-states that Philip had conquered saw an opportunity. They declared independence. Neighboring tribes invaded Macedonian territory. Rival claimants to the throne emerged. The Persian Empire, the largest empire in the world, watched with interest. Within weeks, it looked like Macedonia would tear itself apart. Most people would have tried to negotiate, to compromise, to buy time. Alexander did the opposite. He moved with speed that shocked everyone. He marched into Greece with his army, and when the city of Thebes continued to resist, he made an example of them. He destroyed the city completely, killed thousands, enslaved the survivors, razed buildings to the ground. Brutal, horrifying, but effective. The message was clear. Alexander might be young, but he was not weak. The rest of Greece surrendered. Then he turned north and crushed the tribal invasions with a series of lightning campaigns. He fought battles in terrain everyone said was impossible. He crossed rivers everyone said were uncrossable. He showed up where enemies thought he couldn't possibly be. In less than 2 years, he had secured his throne and his borders. And then he did something that seemed absolutely insane. He decided to invade Persia. Let's pause and understand what this meant. The Persian Empire was the superpower of the ancient world. It stretched from Egypt to India, from the Mediterranean to Central Asia. It had ruled for 200 years. It had professional armies, unlimited resources, and a king, Darius III, who commanded hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Macedonia was a small kingdom with maybe 30,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry. Invading Persia wasn't ambitious, it was suicidal. But Alexander saw something others didn't. He saw that Persia was vast but brittle, that it was a collection of conquered peoples held together by force, that its armies were large but poorly coordinated, that its commanders were conservative, following the same playbook that had worked for centuries. And he believed, rightly, that if he could defeat their armies in the field and capture their king, the whole empire would collapse. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed into Asia Minor with his army. His first major battle was at the Granicus River. The Persians held the far bank with cavalry and infantry, a strong defensive position. The conventional move was to find another crossing, to outmaneuver them. Alexander attacked directly, leading the charge himself, plunging into the river on horseback while arrows and javelins rained down. It was reckless. It was insane. And it worked. The shock of seeing their enemy charging straight at them, led by their king personally, broke the Persian line. Alexander won the battle in minutes. This was the first sign of his tactical genius. Alexander understood psychology. He knew that war isn't just about killing the enemy, it's about breaking their will to fight. And nothing breaks morale like seeing your opponent do something impossible, something terrifying, something that makes you question whether you can win. But that was just the beginning. The real test came a year later at the Battle of Issus. This time, Darius himself came to meet Alexander with a massive army. Ancient sources claim Darius had over 100,000 men. Modern estimates say maybe 60,000. Either way, Alexander had maybe 40,000. And Darius chose the battlefield carefully, a narrow plain hemmed in by mountains on one side and the sea on the other. He wanted to negate Alexander's maneuverability. Any other commander would have retreated. Darius had more men, a defensive position, and he chose the ground. The smart move was to fall back, find better terrain, and fight another day. Alexander attacked. But he didn't just attack, he did something brilliant. He analyzed how Darius had positioned his forces. Darius had put his best troops, his Greek mercenaries, in the center. His cavalry was on the flanks, and Darius himself was in the rear center, behind his infantry, where he could command the battle. Alexander arranged his forces differently. He put his phalanx, his heavy infantry, in the center with orders to hold the line but not advance aggressively. Then he took his elite companion cavalry, the best horsemen in the world, and positioned them on the right flank. When the battle began, the center held. It was brutal, grinding combat, men pushing and dying in tight formation. But that was a distraction. Alexander led his cavalry in a massive charge at an angle, smashing through the Persian left flank, then wheeling inward. He wasn't trying to destroy the Persian army, he was trying to reach Darius. He saw that if he could kill or capture the Persian king, the battle was over. Darius's personal guard fought desperately, but Alexander and his cavalry carved through them like a spear through flesh. At one point, Alexander and Darius were close enough to see each other. Ancient accounts say their eyes met across the battlefield. And then Darius turned and fled. The moment the Persian soldiers saw their king running, the army collapsed. Panic spread like wildfire. What had been an organized defense became a rout. Tens of thousands of Persians died trying to escape. Darius abandoned his family, his treasure, everything. Alexander won one of history's most decisive victories because he understood a fundamental truth. Armies aren't machines. They're made of people, and people break when they lose hope. After Issus, Alexander controlled the entire eastern Mediterranean coast. He could have chased Darius immediately, tried to end the war quickly. Instead, he did something strategic. He secured the East Mediterranean coastline, conquering every port city. Why? Because Persia had a massive navy, and Alexander didn't. If he marched into the Persian heartland and left the coast unsecured, that navy could land armies behind him, cut off his supply lines, invade Macedonia while he was gone. So he systematically captured every port, ship by ship, city by city. He defeated a navy by conquering land. Brilliant. The most famous of these sieges was Tyre, a city built on an island half a mile offshore. Tyre had never been conquered because it was unreachable. Alexander built a causeway, a road, across half a mile of ocean. He used rubble from the old city on the mainland, tree trunks, stones, anything he could find. The Tyrians thought he was insane. They attacked his workers. They sank ships with fire. It didn't matter. Alexander kept building. It took 7 months, but he reached the island, stormed the walls, and took the city. Even today, that causeway still exists. Tyre is now permanently connected to the mainland because Alexander refused to accept that something was impossible. This is a key part of his genius: logistics, siegecraft, engineering. Alexander didn't just win battles, he solved problems. When conventional methods didn't work, he invented new ones. When there was no path, he built one, literally. By 331 BC, Alexander controlled the entire coast and was ready to march into the heart of Persia. Darius gathered one more army, the largest yet, and this time he chose his ground carefully. The plain of Gaugamela, flat as a table, perfect for his massive cavalry and scythe chariots with blades on the wheels, designed to cut through infantry formations. Darius had learned from his mistakes. He had the terrain, he had overwhelming numbers. Some estimates say he had 200,000 men. Alexander had maybe 40,000.
The night before the battle, Alexander's generals urged him to attack in darkness to surprise the Persians. Alexander refused. He said, and this is a real quote, "I will not steal my victory." He wanted to win in daylight, in open battle, so there could be no doubt. That's not bravado. That's psychological warfare. He wanted Darius to know he'd been beaten fairly, that there were no excuses. At dawn, the armies faced each other across the plain. Darius had his plan: use the chariots to break Alexander's line, then overwhelm him with numbers. It should have worked. The chariots charged. Alexander's infantry opened lanes in their formation. The chariots rolled right through, harmlessly, and were captured in the rear. The Persian cavalry attacked both flanks. Alexander's flanks held, barely trading ground for time. And then Alexander saw it. As the Persian cavalry committed to the flanks, a gap opened in their line. A small one, near where Darius stood. Most commanders wouldn't have noticed, or wouldn't have risked everything on it. Alexander formed a wedge with his companion cavalry and charged straight into that gap. Again, he was going for Darius personally. It was an insane risk. If the Persian line closed behind him, he and his elite cavalry would be surrounded and killed. But Alexander trusted his men, trusted his judgment, and charged. The wedge punched through. Alexander's cavalry reached Darius's position, and again, Darius fled. The moment the Persian army saw their king running, they broke. Gaugamela was an even more complete victory than Issus. Darius would spend the rest of his life running. He'd eventually be killed by his own generals, and Alexander controlled the Persian Empire at age 25. Think about that for a moment. In 5 years, Alexander had gone from a young king fighting for survival to master of the largest empire the world had ever seen. How? Not because he had more soldiers, not because he was wealthier, because he outthought everyone. He moved faster, saw opportunities others missed, and took risks that seemed insane but were actually calculated.
Alexander understood the importance of morale and leadership. He fought in the front lines, always. Kings didn't do that. Commanders directed battles from safe positions. But Alexander led charges personally. He was wounded in almost every major battle. At Issus, his thigh was pierced by a sword. At Gaza, a projectile went through his shoulder. In India, an arrow went through his lung. He should have died a dozen times, but his soldiers saw him bleeding alongside them, taking the same risks, and they followed him anywhere. There's a famous story. During the march through the desert in Gaugamela, the army was dying of thirst. A group of soldiers found a helmet full of water and brought it to Alexander. He thanked them, then poured the water onto the ground in front of the entire army. If his men couldn't drink, neither would he. That's leadership. That's how you make men willing to march to the ends of the earth for you. The cracks started showing. In 330 BC, Alexander killed one of his closest friends, Clitus, in a drunken argument. Clitus had saved Alexander's life at the Granicus River, but when he criticized Alexander for acting like a Persian, Alexander grabbed a spear and stabbed him. He immediately regretted it, locked himself in his tent for days, weeping. But the damage was done. His men started to fear him as much as they admired him. In 326 BC, after conquering much of India, his army mutinied. Not because they were losing, because they'd been marching and fighting for 8 years. They were exhausted. They wanted to go home. They'd followed Alexander across mountains and deserts, through countries they'd never heard of, fighting enemies they didn't hate. They'd done everything he asked. But when Alexander said they would continue east to the edge of the world, they refused. For the first time, Alexander couldn't win, not against enemy armies, against his own men's exhaustion. He agreed to turn back, but the return journey was a nightmare. Marching through the Gaugamela desert, thousands died from heat and thirst. The fleets sent to shadow them along the coast got lost in storms. By the time they reached Babylon, the capital of his new empire, Alexander was a different man, physically worn down from his wounds, mentally exhausted from constant warfare, paranoid about plots and betrayals. In 323 BC, at age 32, Alexander fell ill. Fever, chills, pain. He lingered for 10 days, growing weaker. Ancient historians say his generals asked him on his deathbed who should inherit his empire. He supposedly said, "To the strongest." Then he died. The exact cause of death is debated. Malaria? Typhoid? Poisoning? We'll never know. What we do know is this. In 13 years, Alexander conquered most of the known world. He fought perhaps 11 major battles and never lost one. He founded over 70 cities, many named Alexandria. He spread Greek culture across 3 continents, creating what historians call the Hellenistic Age, a fusion of Greek and Eastern cultures that would dominate for centuries. But more than that, he changed how people thought about warfare. Before Alexander, wars were slow, predictable affairs. Armies maneuvered carefully. Battles were fought according to established rules. Alexander threw out the rules. He moved faster, hit harder, took bigger risks, and won more decisively than anyone thought possible. Every great general who came after, Julius Caesar, Hannibal, Napoleon, studied Alexander's campaigns. They all tried to imitate him. Few succeeded. So what made Alexander great? It wasn't just his tactical skill, though that was extraordinary. It wasn't just his personal courage, though he had more than anyone. It wasn't just his strategic vision, though he saw possibilities others missed. It was the combination. He was a student who learned from Aristotle, a warrior who fought alongside his men, a risk-taker who bet everything on moments of opportunity, a builder who founded cities and spread ideas, a leader who inspired fanatical loyalty. He was also flawed, brutal when he needed to be, sometimes when he didn't need to be, increasingly paranoid and erratic as the years went on, unable to stop, to consolidate, to enjoy what he'd won. He had to keep pushing, keep conquering, until his own body and his own army told him no. There's a saying, Alexander wept when he realized there were no more worlds to conquer. That's probably not true, but it captures something essential about him. He wasn't driven by wealth or power or glory, though he had all 3. He was driven by something deeper, a need to achieve, to overcome, to do what no one else had done, to become immortal, not just in name, but in deed. And in that, he succeeded. We're talking about him 2,300 years later. His name is synonymous with greatness. His campaigns are taught in every military academy. His tactics are analyzed in books and classrooms. He conquered an empire, but more than that, he conquered history itself. So what can we learn from Alexander? What does his story teach us today? I think it's this. Genius isn't about following the rules. It's about knowing when to break them. It's about seeing what others don't see and having the courage to act on it. It's about surrounding yourself with skilled people and inspiring them to follow you into impossible situations. It's about speed, decisiveness, and the willingness to risk everything when the moment demands it. But it also teaches us about the cost of greatness. Alexander conquered the world but died young, worn out, possibly betrayed by his own body. He sacrificed everything, including himself, for glory that would last millennia. Was it worth it? That's not for me to say, but it's worth thinking about. If you made it this far, thank you. This was one of the most fascinating stories I've ever researched. If you enjoyed this deep dive into military genius, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment. If you could ask Alexander one question, what would it be? I'm curious what you think. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.